As Director of the International Labour Standards Department of the International Labour Office, it's my honor to have the opportunity to come before this august body, albeit virtually, I'm afraid, to reflect upon the importance in the global community of fundamental principles and rights at work and the conventions that support them. In the brief time I have, I will first recall the resounding commitment made by the international community to core labor standards and principles and the rationale for adhering to these founding values. Secondly, I will address the economic arguments which support this commitment and render it credible. In the third place, I will touch upon the nature of the core conventions that have not yet been ratified by the Republic of Korea and whether they represent any unsurmountable challenges. Finally, I will reflect upon the alternatives for a dynamic engagement with these international human rights in the ILO centenary year. So, in 1998, all ILO member states committed to respect, promote, and realize in good faith the fundamental rights and principles which are the subject of the 8 core labor standards. In the absence of ratification, ILO members report annually to the ILO on the progress made in this regard, as well as on the prospects for ratification. While Korea's ratification of the Equality and Elimination of Child Labor Conventions were registered around the turn of the century, with the last ratification of a core labor standards in 2001, the 4 remaining conventions on freedom of association, collective bargaining, and the elimination of forced labor go to the heart of the organization mandate. This was recalled in 2008 when the organization and its member states emphasized in the ILO Declaration on Social Justice for a Fair Globalization that the respect of the fundamental principles and rights at work was not only of particular significance for ensuring rights, but also critical as these were enabling conditions necessary for the realization of the decent work agenda. Freedom of association and the effective recognition of collective bargaining were highlighted as being even more critical to the attainment of the ILO objectives. They represent the foundation for meaningful representation in the organization and are indispensable to ensuring its legitimacy. This holds true for all social and labor dialogue mechanisms, whether at local, national, regional, or international level. Beyond the commitment to principles, how strong is the commitment to core labor standards and their supervision? As you know, ILO has 187 member states. 144 member states have embraced the integrated approach to fundamental principles and rights at work by ratifying all 8 fundamental conventions. Only 11 member states have ratified 4 or fewer core conventions. Moreover, the international community is heeding the call to universal ratification at an intensifying rate. The 2018 Asian Regional Conference Bali Declaration recognized their importance by prioritizing the need to increase ratification of fundamental labor standards, particularly the Freedom of Association Convention number 87 and the Collective Bargaining Convention 98, including providing a policy environment that enables the realization of these rights. This regional statement was echoed in last year's conference, which called for the universal ratification of Convention number 87 and 98 as fundamental to meaningful social dialogue. But why does the ratification of core labor standards matter to the international community? The answer to this question is steeped in the history of the ILO and the lessons learned following on 2 world wars. The rapid recognition that a fair and level playing field in the area of labor rights was necessary to avoid social dumping and a race to the bottom was central to the ILO Constitution and its subsequent foundational declarations. The critical importance of this notion within a rapid-paced globalization became even clearer. As the world community's expectation that economic growth and social progress will go hand in hand increases, it's not surprising to observe the expansion and multiplication of international legal instruments on trade and finance which reference these standards and principles. Ratification of core labor standards is an important legal and political statement of commitment to that level playing field in the assurance of respect for human rights and democracy. With ratification comes the acceptance of engagement with the international community through supervision aimed to bolster these rights on the ground through universal application. In this way, all 8 conventions have been ratified throughout Europe, a demonstrated commitment to a minimum social floor. Similarly, nearly all OECD countries have ratified the fundamental conventions. Ratification also represents an important signal of commitment at national level, which is crucial for fostering the trust of the social partners and transitioning from an environment of conflict to one of dialogue. While the Committee on Freedom of Association has been receiving complaints concerning Korea ever since it became an ILO member, ratification of these fundamental conventions would enable the government to stand with the over 155 ILO member states that, through their commitment to these conventions, engage in a regular dialogue of encouragement and advice with the organs of supervision. Does respect for core labor standards pose a risk to economic development? This is a question we often hear. Well, while some may raise concerns about the impact of core labor standards on economic development, studies over the last 2 decades have demonstrated that, if anything, respect for these fundamental rights is rather conducive to economic growth and opportunity. The developed countries of the OECD, for example, have long since recognized that their competitive edge does not come from low standards, but rather from their capacity for innovation, increased productivity, and efficiency, all of which are ultimately well served by a harmonious labor relations environment. So for companies, ratification ensures clear rules and the knowledge of their fair applicability across the board. At the same time, it represents the first visible indicator that firms cannot benefit from an unfair advantage derived from violation of these rights. Ratification signals that business, which do not abide by these basic labor and human rights, will not thrive in a climate of impunity. It's the entry point for demonstrating responsible business conduct and the exercise of due diligence. It also responds to the growing demands in trade arrangements to ensure sustainable development on equal terms, while recognizing the impartial and independent role of the ILO in reviewing the application of these standards. So, do the Freedom of Association and Elimination of Forced Labor Convention contain standards that are unattainable? This clearly is not the view of the world community, given the high level of ratification of these conventions. While some technical issues may remain, countries engage in regular dialogue with the ILO supervisory bodies to explain the circumstances and challenges they face and benefit from the reflection of expert bodies with knowledge of good practice and proposals for alternative options to ensure the basic standards. Korea has regularly been reviewed by the Committee on Freedom of Association within the framework of a complaints-based procedure revolving around disputes and conflict. Commitment through ratification of the core convention can play an important role in building the trust in the overall goals and objectives of the tripartite partners and serve as a foundation for renewed dialogue and confidence. Tripartite social dialogue and engagement with the knowledge and expertise of the ILO bodies can facilitate the search for appropriate solutions that respond to the needs and interests of all. There are a variety of alternative means for adjusting the current legislative framework so as to bring it fully in line with the Freedom of Association and Forced Labor Conventions. The Committee of Experts has provided in-depth advice and reflection for all ILO member states through its general surveys on world law and practice, most recently in 2012. The Committee on Freedom of Association, for its part, has also provided detailed analysis of the law and practice in Korea through its examination of cases brought by the trade union movement, presenting various challenges encountered. This gave the committee the occasion to provide advice, which resulted on numerous occasions in its being able to welcome the significant progress made over the years in creating an environment conducive to the free exercise of these fundamental rights. A context which was once profoundly in violation of these principles due to the legislative imposition of a trade union monopoly at various levels, has now notably evolved to one where simple and easy action would appear sufficient to amend the remaining provisions without in any way drastically overhauling the labor relations system that has been admirably developed in Korea. For freedom of association, the changes concern the need to ensure that all workers, without distinction, be able to organize, leaving membership eligibility up to the trade unions themselves. Ensuring this rudimentary fundamental right would not seem to be an issue that would cause major disruption in labor relations, but it would signal the full integration of democratic principles in the field of labor. The freedom of association that is ensured to all workers and all employers is the prerequisite to their being able to engage freely and meaningfully, without interference, in the determination of their terms and conditions of employment, and of the conditions and facilities for their relation with each other. Resort to industrial action as last recourse should be protected so as to ensure that the effective exercise of collective bargaining is not an illusion. Let me now turn to ratification and continued improvement. Since its membership in the ILO, Korea has made great strides in ensuring respect for the fundamental principles and rights at work, and has demonstrated a meaningful and constructive engagement with the supervisory bodies towards continued improvement that has been warmly welcomed on numerous occasions. In this regard, Korea has shown itself to be a leader in the region, demonstrating the importance of minimum standards of universal application through a profound and serious engagement in its dialogue with the ILO. The government's ratification of the remaining 4 conventions would further serve as a guide to other countries in the region as they consider their own ratification prospects. In fact, several countries have already indicated their intention to ratify at least one of the 8 fundamental conventions in this centenary year. The Korean National Assembly recognized the central importance of these fundamental conventions when it committed to making progress in their ratification and implementation through its endorsement of the European Union-Korea Free Trade Agreement. The National Assembly, thus, by definition, will continue to review the existing laws so as to show the efforts made and ensure that progress is indeed visible. Going one step further, to consider ratification can be an important dynamic factor in that progress. As I stated at the outset, ratification is a commitment, a promise, a vow, to join with the international commitment by accepting to be judged by the same standard. The crux is in the commitment, which permits adaptation to the continuous flux of jobs, work, and labor legislation. As the future of work evolves, so will the practice that effectively ensure labor rights protection and sustainable development. The cyclical supervision of ratified conventions ensures engagement and monitoring over time and the exchange of good practice. Those who choose to hold ratification off until the legislative framework is perfect and all parties are satisfied may find that progress is slow and that their action does not benefit from the advantage of learning from others within the international community who can share their challenges, opportunities, and solutions. In order to benefit from this wealth of knowledge, international labor standards have recognized from the outset the need for a 1-year grace period following ratification before a convention comes into force, in order precisely to enable countries to confirm their commitment while leaving sufficient time to make any final changes which may be more complex and require further reflection. In the year of the centenary, this flexibility will enable countries to resoundingly confirm their support to the objectives of the ILO in harmony with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. So much has already been done in Korea. The ILO stands ready to support all the government's institutions and the social partners in the furtherance of their commitment to the organization and the fundamental values upon which it is based. I thank you very much for your attention.